Every empire ends the same way. Not with weakness, but with hunger. You build, you consume, you dominate, until there's nothing left to take. And then the collapse doesn't come from outside. It comes from your own appetite. Now imagine that same story, but underwater. Because 380 million years ago, Earth's oceans invented the first empire, and the first self-inflicted extinction. The Devonian wasn't the age of fishes, it was the age of eating. And it started with a creature that bit so hard, it broke the ocean. Welcome to the ocean that ate everything, including itself. Meet Dunkleosteus terrelli. We only have parts of it, mostly the front half, mostly the business end. But even from that, we know it wasn't small. This thing may have weighed well over a ton. You could think car, except the car is angry and fully carnivorous. 30 feet of armored fury. Bone plates where scales should be, interlocked like ancient plate mail. No softness, no weak spots, just prehistoric spite turned into armor. If evolution sat down and said, design me something that wins every fight, Dunkleosteus is what it would draw. But here's where it gets interesting. Dunkleosteus didn't have teeth. It had blades, self-sharpening bone edges that honed themselves every time the mouth closed. Continuous growth, continuous sharpening. Natural guillotines powered by muscles that could generate an estimated 8 to 11,000 newtons of bite force at the jaw tip. That's one of the most powerful bites ever measured in any animal, living or extinct. Comparable to crocodiles and possibly T-Rex, except this lived in the ocean 380 million years ago when the most advanced life on land was still figuring out how joints worked. If tanks could bite, they'd be Dunkleosteus. Except this tank sometimes ate other tanks. The jaw mechanism itself was absurd. Dunkleosteus could open its mouth in 50 milliseconds, 1/20th of a second, faster than you can blink. It would create a vacuum effect, sucking prey into its mouth while simultaneously closing those bone blades around them. The result? Instant obliteration. Dunkleosteus didn't chew food. It didn't need to chew. It pulverized prey into bite-sized chunks through sheer hydraulic pressure and bone blade action, swallowed the pieces, and moved on to the next target. We know this because we've found its vomit. Fossilized regurgitated remains of partially digested fish and other placoderms, expelled because Dunkleosteus ate so violently and indiscriminately that sometimes its stomach couldn't keep up with its appetite, which, to be fair, is still better fossil evidence than most early science textbooks. It was less a predator and more a mobile garbage disposal with territorial issues. And Dunkleosteus wasn't alone in these waters. The Devonian was crowded. You had fast, streamlined shark prototypes like Cladosalach, quick, efficient hunters built for speed. You had bottom feeders like Bothriolopus, armored little vacuum cleaners dragging themselves along the seafloor inside natural body armor. All of them were trying not to get turned into confetti by the thing with the guillotine head, and it dominated. For roughly 20 million years, Dunkleosteus and its relatives sat at the top of the food chain across ancient seas, living in what is now North America, Europe, Africa, and Morocco. Apex predators with no natural enemies except each other in physics. But here's the thing about being at the top of the food chain, with an insatiable appetite and no self-control. Eventually, you run out of food. When everything in the ocean evolves armor, spikes, and moves like it's late for something, you don't get peace. You get an ecosystem that's functionally one large, very angry buffet where every item on the menu bites back. The Devonian Ocean was an evolutionary experiment in escalation. Prey evolved heavy armor to survive predators. Predators evolved stronger jaws to crack armor. Prey got heavier armor. Predators got even stronger jaws. Round and round until you've got an ocean full of over-specialized killing machines that can barely eat anything except each other. This is not sustainable. And then the fossils started telling a different story. We know the Devonian seas were experiencing ecological stress because the fossil record shows something disturbing. Dunkleosteus ate Dunkleosteus. We've found bite marks on Dunkleosteus fossils that match, you guessed it, Dunkleosteus jaw dimensions. Cannibalism. The ocean's apex predator had resorted to eating its own species because prey was either too heavily armored, too scarce, or too difficult to catch. Basically, evolution invented an aquatic arms race, forgot to include a ceasefire protocol, and everyone started eating their coworkers. But cannibalism wasn't the only problem. The Devonian seas were also dealing with environmental changes that made everything worse. Oxygen levels in the water were fluctuating, sometimes declining to levels that stressed marine life. Land masses were shifting. Volcanic activity increased. Nutrients from land erosion triggered massive algae blooms that would die off and consume oxygen as they decomposed. The ocean was becoming less habitable and more unstable and significantly hungrier. And the predators, they just kept hunting, because that's what they were built to do. Even as their prey disappeared, even as the environment turned hostile, Dunkleosteus kept being Dunkleosteus, an apex predator in an ecosystem that could no longer support apex predators. Nature's response to this unsustainable ecological chaos? It turned off the lights and told everyone to leave. Around 372 million years ago, the ocean changed hard. A series of environmental catastrophes converged to create one of the worst extinction events in marine history. Two mass extinctions separated by about 15 million years. Both devastating, both probably triggered by similar mechanisms. Here's what likely happened. Volcanic activity increased, pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This triggered global warming. Warming oceans can hold less dissolved oxygen. At the same time, increased nutrients from continental erosion fed massive algae blooms. When these blooms died, they sank to the ocean floor and decomposed, consuming even more oxygen. The result? Widespread anoxia. Dead zones where oxygen levels dropped so low that most marine life simply suffocated. The water turned black. The reefs went silent. And the planet took a long, wet breath it didn't release for 15 million years. If you've ever heard about modern ocean dead zones caused by agricultural runoff, same principle, except this was the entire ocean, and there was no agricultural runoff. Just Earth doing what Earth does when too many environmental stressors align. The Devonian version was the same concept, just without farms, fertilizer, or humans, which is honestly kind of insulting. The planet managed to wreck its own oceans without us. It's like the entire sea collectively passed out. Reefs died first. The Devonian had seen an explosion of reef-building organisms, not just corals, but also stromatoporoids and other reef builders. These ecosystems collapsed. Some estimates suggest up to 75% of all species went extinct during these events. The ocean wasn't a hunting ground anymore. It was a crime scene. And the apex predators, the armored giants that had ruled for millions of years, they starved, because when the prey die and there's nothing left to eat except other starving predators, even the strongest jaws can't save you. For the first time in its reign, Dunkleosteus faced an opponent it couldn't bite its way through, an ocean that had stopped sustaining life. Dunkleosteus terrelli survived for roughly 20 million years, an impressive run by any standard. It weathered environmental changes, outlasted competitors, dominated multiple continents worth of ancient seas. But evolution doesn't reward past success. It only cares about current fitness. And when the Devonian seas began their final collapse, Dunkleosteus's specializations became liabilities. That massive armored body, expensive to maintain, requires enormous amounts of food. When food becomes scarce, being large and heavily armored means you're the first to starve. Those incredible jaws, useless if there's nothing to bite. Doesn't matter how strong your bite force is when the ocean is empty. The placoderms, the entire group of armored fish that Dunkleosteus belonged to, didn't fade out. They vanished, not with survivors, not with descendants, completely extinct. Every species, every genus, every family, the entire class, gone. It ruled for 20 million years, survived everything the ocean could throw at it, adapted to countless environmental pressures, and then died because it ran out of lunch. Somewhere on a dead seafloor, a Dunkleosteus jaw lies open, still waiting for something that never comes. Silt drifts through its teeth like dust through a cathedral. It was the ocean's biggest mistake and greatest masterpiece. A weapon so effective it deleted its own food supply. A predator so successful it ate itself out of an ecosystem. The last Dunkleosteus probably died hungry, in an oxygen-depleted sea, surrounded by the fossilizing remains of an ecosystem that could no longer support it. There's something almost poetic about that. Almost. After the Hangenberg extinction event, the ocean was quiet, emptier than it had been in hundreds of millions of years. Approximately 75% of marine species vanished. The great reef systems that had defined Devonian seas, gone. They wouldn't recover for nearly 100 million years, the longest reef gap in Earth's history. The armored giants that had dominated the seas, extinct. The complex food webs that had sustained diverse ecosystems, collapsed. The ocean hit restart. And when it loaded back in, the world was different. The survivors were smaller, more adaptable, less specialized. Sharks, which had existed during the Devonian but remained relatively minor players, began their rise to dominance. They weren't as heavily armored. They weren't as big. But they were flexible, adaptable, efficient. Bony fish, the ancestors of most modern fish, diversified and filled the empty niches. They had been around during the Devonian too, but overshadowed by the placoderms. Now they had room to experiment. Nature scrapped the armored tanks and let the leaner designs take over. Sharks, lighter frames, no heavy plating, just cartilage and attitude, started moving into the empty throne. Evolution doesn't take notes. It just deletes the file and opens a new one. The Devonian wasn't a lesson, it was a filter. The survivors weren't better. They were just different enough to survive when everything else died. And that's how ecosystems work. They don't progress towards some goal. They don't optimize for peace or balance. They stumble forward through trial and error, occasionally falling into pits of their own making. And the species that make it to the other side get to try again. The ocean after the late Devonian extinctions was quieter, emptier, less terrifying than it had been. Give it another few 100 million years, though. The teeth would come back. They always do. So here's what we learned. 380 million years ago, the ocean was ruled by armored predators with jaws that could crush bone. They were so successful, so dominant, so perfectly adapted to killing that they destabilized their entire ecosystem. And then they went extinct. All of them. Not because they were weak, but because they were too good at what they did. There's probably a lesson in that. But evolution doesn't care about lessons, only reruns. Next time someone tells you the ocean is peaceful, remind them that it once tried to delete the planet through sheer predatory excess. Remind them that the ocean's idea of balance was an armored fish the size of a car with guillotine jaws eating everything, including itself. The ocean doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. It just waits. And somewhere, in the depths, something is always evolving, Jaws. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Dead Curious.